Coming up on Downloaded, Google I/O, from music to maps. What does the big G have in store for us? Hey, the Department of Justice is going after the Associated Press. Is Big Brother spying on you? Oh, and guess what? Yahoo's talking about buying yet another company. Are you bored of that yet? How about Nintendo's Wii U? Is it failing? I think we're all bored of the Wii U. We got all that and a lot more on this episode of Downloaded. Hey, welcome to Downloaded. This is the show where we gather the most opinionated voices in the tech field today and focus all that energy on the stories impacting the tech world right now. I'm your host, Jim Louderback. I'm super happy to have two guests back today. First of all, Justin Severson from Pilot TV. Justin, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Good to have you here. And Ryan Lawler from TechCrunch. Also glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Super psyched to have both you guys because the big thing happening this week, Google I/O. Tons of stuff going on at Google. Ryan's been there. He's been at Google I/O. He was at the keynote. And I know, Justin, you've been following it from afar. So we're going to spend a good deal of today's show talking about what happened at Google I/O. You know what is interesting I find about Google I/O? It used to be a year, 2, 3, Apple would do their big thing at the Apple, the Worldwide Developers Conference, and Jobs would get up there and everybody would be like, what's going on? Seems like Google I/O is taking a little bit of that thunder. What do you think, Ryan? You were there.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely sort of reached that type of level, and I think this week when you had Larry Page actually getting up on stage and answering questions, I mean, for me that kind of felt like a Steve Jobs moment. Like, it reminded me of like 96, 97 when Steve Jobs just returned from Apple and he like got up and he did a presentation but took questions from the audience. I mean, Larry was up there for like 45 minutes just sort of talking about his philosophy of Google and technology and where things are going. So it was definitely like...
Does that have that kind of feel to it? I mean, Justin, you weren't there, and I mean, tickets were, I mean, it's impossible to get a ticket to Google I/O, right? You were, I mean, I would have liked to have had a ticket, but I didn't have one. What did you think about it from afar? Did it have that feel of the sort of the emotion of an Apple event?
Yeah, you definitely get that energy. I mean, it's not just a developers conference anymore, right? I mean, you have, like you said, Larry Page is up there. There's tons of stuff coming out. There's a ton of new product to look forward to. It really feels like you said, an old Apple event, even not being there.
Yeah. So let's start off with some of the things that they talked about. Android, they were definitely tooting their own horn, as you would imagine they would do at their event, right? 48 billion apps downloaded, 900 million devices activated. Was this really the point where we can say that Android is now past Apple and the iPhone to be the dominant platform, or are we still sort of on the fence? Ryan, let's start with you.
Well, I mean, from pure device footprint, obviously Android is sort of the bigger ecosystem, but the question is like questions of engagement and monetization. I mean, from that standpoint, the Android ecosystem still really like lags behind where iOS is. I mean, but if you were there at the keynote or there at the conference, like, you know, there's just like pure fanboyism. There was like a dude.
There's Android fanboys, yeah!
Like I don't know if you saw this. There's like a dude like waiting in line to ask a question for Larry, and he was like wearing this like Android hat. It was kind of the funniest thing. I'd love to like
Android,
show it.
So yeah, there's definitely some fanboyishness around the Android thing. You know, Justin, if you were to develop something today, a brand new product for either, and you could pick one, Android or iOS, what would you do today?
Well, personal bias aside, the trouble with Android is that, at least from my perspective, is it still seems like a very fragmented area. There's so many devices with so many different versions of Android. Having to develop an app that would work well on a vast majority of that seems like a pretty daunting task. So I would go with iOS, but that may be some of my personal bias.
Yeah. Wait a minute. You got to take my screen here. Is that the guy with the Android hat?
Yeah.
Is that him?
This is great.
Look at that hat. I love that. He looks so serious too. It's hard to look serious in a hat that looks like that. But you're right. I mean, there's such a fractured environment that it's hard to know if it's going to work across all of them, right?
Right.
Interesting. So the other thing that happened on the Android side, which I thought was fascinating, is that Google, their next Nexus phone, they decided to say, oh, Nexus phone's been a big deal. It's going to be the Samsung Galaxy 4. And it's really the Samsung Nexus Galaxy 4. First of all, I thought it was interesting that they went with Samsung. Were either of you surprised by that announcement?
I was kind of surprised that they didn't have a Motorola product to, you know, I mean, they bought Motorola how long ago, and they should have sort of a Motorola phone that is in some way
the best Android experience
that you can get, right?
Yeah.
But instead, they're just layering stock Android on someone else's phone, which just seemed weird to me.
I think one thing to consider is that as far as Android versus Apple, Samsung is a big player in that. You know,
Yep.
all their ads are very targeted against Apple. So as far as the public perception goes, maybe Android is Samsung, and maybe Google is trying to capitalize on that.
So the thing that I thought was surprising, and I guess I shouldn't surprise me, but the last Nexus phone, which I happen to have one right here. Those of you who watch the show know that I love my Nexus. This is the one I got in January, $350. This one, the new Nexus, $650. That price is expensive, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's not for mainstream. I mean, the advantage of having that phone is having the most recent version of Android, like not having to worry about carrier or or the manufacturer deciding which version of Android is going to run on it and when it gets updated. You know, it's really for this pure tech niche audience. So. I mean, if you're that guy, you'll spend $650 on it, but I don't think that there are going to be a lot of those people.
Yeah, I don't know. I like the idea of having pure Android. I guess I'm a little bit of a geek, I could say that, but I don't think I'd spend $650. Would you spend $650 on a phone like this?
Probably not, especially if I just bought a phone. And this one came out in what, November, December?
You know what? That's another good point, right? Is that the rapid pace of change? It's only been 5 months.
Yeah, and to your point, like this is for like the very targeted audience. Do you think that the pace of releases is going to be an issue for those people?
I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where I know people who are big Android followers that like love the devices, but they're constantly like 2 or 3 versions of Android behind just because manufacturer doesn't update it. The carrier won't allow or whatever, and it seems like that in itself kind of is holding back the Android ecosystem because, to your point, everything's so fragmented. You never know like who's going to have what version of what device to run your app.
Well, even more than just the rapid pace of change for phone development in general feels like it's accelerating. Like this is 5 months old. I already feel like I'm out of date. I'm wearing last month's fashions. Is that a problem for most people, or people don't care? Just give me a phone, and if it's good, I'll use it until the screen breaks. I mean, what do you think about that, Justin?
I mean, I think that there are still a lot of people using old Androids, even old iPhones. People are still getting by with iPhone 3GSs. I don't think that these newer releases are necessarily for everybody. I have an iPhone 5. I may or may not get it, whatever the next one is.
The 6 or the 7 or the 12,
right,
or yeah.
Right, exactly. I mean, this. And also, with carrier plans, you're in a 2-year contract. It's a much more difficult sell to upgrade every single year when you're forced to pay a much higher price.
Right. Yeah. But at least in the Apple ecosystem, you sort of have an idea of, okay, the next new awesome phone isn't coming out until a year from now.
Right.
Right. It's not like you buy the top of the line thing and then 3 months later it's obsolete or it's second best or whatever.
Yeah, it's supplanted. Another thing that went from well, it was always kind of second best, Internet Explorer, but they were talking a lot about Chrome and the Chrome browser and how well it's done. And so they put a stake in the ground and they said, we are the #1 browser in the world, 750 million active users. I'm using Chrome right now. What do you, Justin? What do you think? Is Chrome really a better browser? And are they right to say that we're the best?
Compared to Internet Explorer?
Or Firefox?
Absolutely.
Or Safari or all the other browsers?
Yeah, I mean, Chrome has I think a big advantage because it ties in all of Google's various apps.
Right.
Gmail, Google Music, all of that stuff works really well in Chrome. And Safari has plugins, other browsers have plugins, but they don't work quite as well together because with Google everything's by them. And everybody uses Gmail, so there is a really compelling reason to use Chrome as opposed to a stock browser, whether that's Internet Explorer or Safari.
Yeah, they did a good job with Chrome, I gotta say. I mean, Chrome is definitely a big win. You think so, Ryan?
Yeah, I really like the fact, I mean, I use Chrome on my desktop. I use it as my default browser on my iPhone. And part of that's just the convenience of like, having your password synchronized or
right.
Your bookmarks or whatever. I mean, I know that you can do that with Safari as well, but Safari kind of sucks. So like,
it's kind of nice to have it all synced across all your different devices.
Yeah.
Now, what about the Chromebook? The big thing about Google I/O is You go there and they give something away to you. And a lot of people actually were expecting that, attendees were expecting they were going to get Google Glass.
Right.
Nobody got Glass this year. They all got the latest Chromebook Pixel, which is their $1,200, really expensive, retinal display style Chromebook. I've been kind of down on the Chromebook, but what do you think about this device, Ryan? Do you think it's a good device? I noticed you don't have one.
I got a chance to play with it because they were handing them out. I got a chance to play with it, and it's one of those things where, I mean, it's a beautiful laptop, but it only really works if you're online. Yeah. And that's the problem with all the Chromebooks is if you don't have a Wi-Fi connection, like you're kind of screwed. Like there's not that much you can do with it. So from that perspective, I think it's a difficult sell. Like, it makes sense to have that sort of netbook functionality on a device that's $300 or $400, but to sell something for $1,200, $1,300 that doesn't work if you don't have an internet connection is kind of weird. I was
interested to see they're putting Chromebooks in my son's school. So he's on the tech team in 8th grade, and they're putting Chromebooks all around the school, which is actually a really good use of it because you can wipe the machine, you don't have to worry about the kids loading whatever they want. So Justin, if you had to choose, if I came to you and said you can either have a Chromebook or an iPad for personal use and maybe for business use either, which one would you choose?
So many choices today. Like you said, the price is a huge deterrent for the Chromebook. Yeah. If it were a couple $100.
Well, there is a couple $100 version, right? But it's not with a beautiful screen.
Right. I mean, the advantage of the iPad for me is that it ties into all the stuff that I already have, Apple TV, iPhone. I'm already in the Apple ecosystem a lot. So with that, I would choose an iPad. I think that I'm not a huge fan of limited use laptops. If I'm going to be on a laptop, I'm usually sitting at a desk doing work. If I'm lounging around doing basic stuff like browsing the web, the things that the Chromebook is really good at, I think the iPad form factor lends itself to that a little bit better. Yeah, I agree. Another thing, let's talk about search for a minute. And I haven't used this. Like conversational search was a big thing that they announced. They rolled it out, they're going to be out for the desktop where you can sit in your office and go, okay, Google, how do I get to 3rd Street or whatever? Have you used conversational search? Do you see this talking to your computer as something that is actually going to work these days? I mean, it sounds great. When Apple announced Siri, everyone was all up in arms. This is going to be amazing. Nobody uses Siri anymore. It doesn't really work the way that it's supposed to. But from what Google showed for their conversational search, it looks pretty incredible.
Yeah, what do you think, Ryan?
The conversational search, it looks really good and it works, I mean, from what I've seen, it works a whole hell of a lot better than Siri. I think it's kind of weird to talk to a laptop or talk to a computer or, for that matter, talk to your Xbox or whatever. Yeah. I think that that's kind of a tough sell, and it's still kind of creepy.
Okay,
right?
Is this a generational thing though? Because we all grew up with keyboards and mices and things like that. Could you see it becoming a natural thing for people who grew up with it? I mean, 20 years, everybody's talking to their computers and we all look like old fuddy-duddies.
That maybe, I don't know. I think that, there's still a huge, there's still a lot to overcome there.
I think there's a lot to overcome from a technology perspective for sure, but I was reading something that the head of Nuance wrote, the CEO of Nuance, a company that actually is doing a lot of the leadership things here. And he said we've really crossed and of course he's going to say this because he's running the company, right? But he says we've crossed a real chasm, and now with cloud computing and with the ability to do all the stuff that we've done, it's actually gotten tremendously better. But I still think even tremendously better, if it doesn't work 2% of the time, that's a real problem.
Well, I think it depends on the device. Like I can see someone talking to their phone to power the TV,
right?
For example, but to talk directly to the TV somehow seems weird. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, it's the way that things work now. Talking to them seems weird, but if they started building these devices and interfaces, taking into account that voice is just how you use them, then I think that might feel a little better. Because right now you don't need to talk to your computer. You just you click around and it does what you need it to do. But if an interface was built for speech, I think that could be really compelling.
And and he was pointing to that it really works is in the car, right? So you're driving, you've got to go hands-free anyway, and you've got to. He was talking about putting microphone arrays in cars and being able to zero in on the voice of the person talking versus all the external noise, and a lot of that technology he claimed was getting a lot better. So I can see it in specialized. I mean, look, I was talking to my TV last night watching the Sharks game, but I wasn't trying to get my TV to do anything. I just wanted them not to give up 2 goals in the last 2 seconds. But that's a problem too, right? I start talking to my TV because I don't like what's going on. All of a sudden I go, no, 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 and the TV turns off. That would be bad.
that would be horrible. And also, I mean, we think about this in terms of like privacy. Like, do we want Google like knowing all of our voice commands or listening in on everything that we say as a way to power devices? Yep. I don't know.
Well, so let's talk about the music service. This is another thing that they launched. Pretty interesting. They launched their own music service. It's a pretty crowded space. Have they got a chance here, Justin?
I think they do. The nice thing about Google Music is that right now, as it exists, it's sort of like an iTunes type store. You can buy songs, you can download them to your device. But now they're introducing more of an RDO or Spotify type element to it, so that not only can you purchase tracks and keep them, but you can also pay $10 a month and listen to whatever they have on the system. If you like it, you buy it. So it has the best parts of something like iTunes, and also the best parts of a subscription music service, whereas anything that's out right now only has one of those elements. So this appeals, I think, to more people than any of the more targeted ones.
Yeah, Ryan, what do you guys think about the music service over TechCrunch?
I mean, personally, you know, whenever any of these services launch from like someone like Google, there's always like, you know, the Spotify killer, the RDO killer, or whatever. Like, it's a zero-sum game, right? I mean, I see Justin's point. Like, I think it's sort of a nice feature, but at the same time, I think that also has the potential to be confusing from a user experience point of view. You know, just as an example, you know, in a similar fashion, if you go to like Amazon Prime, for instance, you know, they have Amazon Prime instant videos where you get like this big catalog of movies that are available if you're a Prime subscriber. But then they also have sort of purchasable titles or VOD titles as well. And it can get confusing, like which falls into which bucket and what you actually have access to and what you have to pay more for. So I don't know. I think that could be potentially confusing.
So the other thing that came to mind as I look at this, and it is a crowded space, as both of you guys have said, pointing to a lot of different, whether it's Spotify audio or Rhapsody even. I think when you talk about video, people will subscribe to multiple services. So like we at home have Netflix, we have Hulu, we have Amazon. Do you see people subscribing to multiple music services? Is that a use case you could see, Justin?
I think music, it just feels a little different than video.
Yeah.
I mean, people are used to subscribing to multiple channel packages,
right?
So that analogy works very well as far as Hulu, Netflix. The expectation is they have different things, but with music, there's not really an equivalent that exists right now. So I don't know that I see somebody saying, I subscribe to RDO, Spotify, and Google Music. They're too similar in their content.
I could see someone subscribing to Spotify and Pandora simply because they both came from different. Now I know that there's like Spotify Radio, which, you know, has a lot of the same features as what Pandora was from a legacy standpoint. But I don't really see someone subscribing to Spotify and RDO and Google or whatever.
Good service. Do you think it's going to be enough to push the competitors out? And I'll start with you, Justin. Or do you think it's just going to be yet another thing on the shelf?
I think that it's great for people who own Google devices, who have Android devices. It's a great solution for them. RDO and Spotify both have champions that are very committed to those products. So it's tough to say. It'll be interesting to see how much people decide to switch, if at all.
What do you think, Ryan?
I don't know. I mean, I personally think that in most cases, sort of the players that do one thing and do it really well tend to be, you know, those which win in these types of ecosystems or whatever. And those, like when Google enters into, you know, social networking, or when they enter into music or whatever, it's really difficult to sort of supplant like that like single sole purpose.
Right, the guys who spend all their time thinking about it. It's the only thing they do, and they're laser focused on it. Yeah. So one of the things I think Google's done a good job. We'll move to the last part of our Google I/O discussion, which in many ways may be the most important, which is mapping. So I fundamentally think location sits at the center of our next sort of generation breakthrough of computing as it goes mobile. And I think Google has just done an amazing job on maps. This next generation, I've only been able to watch the coverage that you guys did at TechCrunch. Did you get a chance to actually play with the new maps?
Oh yeah, yeah.
What'd you think?
I think it's really cool, and what Google did.
So what's cool about it?
So what's cool is that it's a personalized experience, right? So like everyone gets a different Google Maps,
right?
So what is relevant to me is going to be different than what's relevant to you, just in the way that we interact with things. And so I find that kind of really interesting, being able to take it to that level. Again, a little creepy. Again, like, you know, questions about privacy, and how much Google actually knows and how they use that information. But you know, from the standpoint of like pure user experience, it's really cool.
So one of the things that I've loved that they've released recently is Field Trip, which I have on my phone. Do they have more Field Trip style capabilities in there? You know, that really help you figure out where you are and the cool things around it, to make it less of a here's how to get from point A to point B and more about sort of a world discovery experience?
Yeah, from the perspective of like, from that personalized experience, like they, for instance, like show you places that your friends have been to, or like places that they've rated on like Yelp or whatever, stuff like that, like which could be of interest to you. And also they sort of, one of the use cases that they talked about was, you know, if they know that you're going to like a children's museum, they'll highlight other similar
kid-focused things in the area or something like that.
Yeah.
Justin, do you buy my premise that Google is so far ahead in Maps that everybody else is playing catch up?
Oh,
or do you think it's still wide open?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Maps is something Google's been doing for a really long time. They're very good at it. With Apple Maps, we saw a great example of what happens when somebody tries to sort of one-up Google.
Right.
You know, they don't do everything really great, but I think Maps is one of the things that they do particularly well.
Do you think it's dangerous that they've got a monopoly on this?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to your point too, the amount of data that they're getting from everybody to power this is
kind of scary.
It's a little frightening.
I think it's really interesting, though, when you think about Maps and the idea of self-driving cars, which is like something, or autopilot, or whatever you want to call it, which is something that we haven't really talked about, but you know, it's something that they've like invested money in and they've been testing out or whatever. Like, you know, having all that data will be essential for them, you know, in the future if they're going to also be powering this, like this autopilot driving experience.
Autopilot world, right?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you know, I'm fascinated by that concept as well. I love the idea that we're going to have cars that can drive themselves, because when I'm 85 and I can't drive anywhere, I'll still be able to go places. Ready for that. But I do think the mapping thing is just, I love that they've done such a great job on Maps, and I'm a big fan of it. I just worry about too much power concentrated in one place. And I wonder if the government will get involved.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the other thing is, and you know, not to pull away from Google, but if you look at what powers a lot of different you know, other services, not everyone's keying into Google's Maps, but a lot of people are actually using Foursquare. Like the Foursquare API has been like really powerfully adopted by a lot of services like Instagram or whatever, and they're pulling in all of that data as well. So that's kind of interesting, like, you know, as a potential competitor.
Speaking of Foursquare, let's move on to our next story and away from Google. Everybody else out there watching is like, thank God no more Google. Yahoo is rumored to be buying Foursquare and Path and Pinterest and talk to them. The latest one, Yahoo is talking about buying Tumblr. Justin, what do you think? Are they going to kill Tumblr if they buy them?
It's tough to say. I mean, Yahoo seems to be on a really interesting path right now. With the weather app they just released is beautiful. It's sort of tough to say what they're doing, what their thought process is. I feel like we're going to be really surprised by them.
Yeah, by Yahoo?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd say, so Alexia, who you work with, who is like the queen of snark, wrote a great story about, they're just trying to date. It's like the uncool kid who goes out and buys lunch for all the cool kids so he can sit at the table with them. I mean, what do you think about the whole Yahoo thing?
Well, I mean, they're certainly on an acquisition spree, an acqui-hire spree.
Yeah.
I mean, they keep purchasing all these small little like startups and then, you know, shutting them down and bringing in the talent. But to a certain extent, that's kind of what they have to do, right? I mean, it's easier for them to acqui-hire right now than it is for them to, you know, hire.
People don't want to go to work there, right?
Exactly.
Right,
it's
exactly. So I find that kind of interesting. Obviously, Tumblr is a whole different thing because they wouldn't be shutting that down if they did acquire it.
Yeah.
But I think it would be difficult for them to. I mean, Tumblr users are Tumblr users, not Yahoo users.
Yeah, and the Tumblr uses such a great community, and it's just so different from Yahoo. I feel like coming together is going to be really tough to integrate for those guys. And you know, Google. Why didn't Google buy them? Buy Tumblr, not Yahoo.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to our next story. So this is kind of interesting and more in the sort of privacy and media side, which I found fascinating. So we'll start off with the DOJ going and grabbing a lot of phone records from the Associated Press for terrorism reasons. There was a story about just an airplane in Yemen, something I can't remember exactly where, but it's kind of scary that they didn't just grab a couple of reporters, like 20 different people. I mean, Ryan, that's kind of scary, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, I don't have enough interesting, sources.
You're not talking to enough people.
I'm not talking to enough interesting people to have the Department of Justice like grab my phone records or tap into my email or anything like that. But yeah, it is scary. It is especially where we live in a world where if you are a reporter who deals with sort of these international subjects, to be able to have your data stolen or looked at in that way makes things very sensitive.
Well, it's intimidating. The ACLU is accusing them of intimidating journalists to keep them away from stories that journalists wanted to cover. Justin, that sounds like a problem to me.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they grabbed so much information from so many different reporters that it makes one think, if I'm a reporter, I don't want to cover this because I don't want to have all of my information looked at.
It's like a fishing expedition, right?
Yeah, it's totally unacceptable.
Yeah. So the good news is on something like this is that there are actually solutions in place that people are coming up with. And a related story, The New Yorker has developed this thing called the STRONGBOX. And I thought this is really interesting because it's a way for you as somebody who wants to deliver confidential documents to a journalist without having a paper trail and without potentially being finger pointed. You put it in this private location, you secure it with PGP. The guys at the New Yorker will grab it, and with a laptop that gets refreshed every time they do it. It seems like a fairly convoluted thing. You saw that image up there, lots of different boxes. First of all, Justin, do you buy that they can actually secure the connection between a potential whistleblower and the journalist without having a trail between either of them?
I mean, it seems like they have the right people working on this. Yeah. I don't know enough about it to state definitively.
Yeah, was it going to work?
Like this will work or this won't work. I think it's a great idea. These are the kinds of solutions that we need in the time that we live in, where it's very easy to find out where things are coming from. That we need to find this information. It's important that the public knows that this stuff is going on.
Well, and I think it's also important for potential sources to feel like their privacy will be protected. And I'm sure, I know the DOJ isn't coming after your phone records, right, but I know there are sources who are like, I don't know if I want to send that to Ryan because what happens? Email's not secure. Do you feel like
email's not secure? Your phone records aren't secure, and it almost it reminds me of like, if you watch All the President's Men,
right,
like if you watch sort of the cloak and dagger, scenarios that people were forced to go through to get information from sources back in the day. It was like really kind of interesting, and it almost feels like we're reaching that point, but just on a technological level.
Yeah, I agree. Are you at TechCrunch? I know you probably can't say, but are you guys you must be creating something like this, or thinking about how do we do this? How do we protect it? How do we even if it's just vapor? How do we create the impression that we are really working hard to protect our sources?
We're working very hard on a redesign right now, and that's sort of taking up all of our production development efforts.
But you guys gonna change the logo?
Yeah,
it kind of looks like Minecraft now.
We're gonna change it back.
See, there's the logo right there, the TC. It kind of reminds me of Minecraft now.
Yeah, I think you
heard it here first. They're changing the logo. Soon. They're going back. Who knows? But anyway, I do think it's a good thing, and I think sources need to feel like they will be protected. And good job, Condé Nast. Good job, New Yorker, putting this in place. And I'll bet we'll see a lot more of these.
Hopefully,
as we go forward. So I want to go back to one of the things that you talked about with self-driving cars and maps. A couple of other stories that came out: self-driving planes. Okay, so there was a drone that took off from an aircraft carrier, a stealth bomber, basically, no pilot inside. Here in the UK, they put one of these airplanes up, and you can see it, just saw it right there. It was flying around without a pilot in commercial airspace. I don't know, part of me says this is super cool, part of me is like, oh my God. Justin, would you fly on a pilotless plane?
Well, pilots now, I mean, they don't do a whole lot if everything goes right.
Right.
You know, they take off, they land. Most of the time, it's an autopilot, so it doesn't change things too dramatically right now, but it'll definitely be interesting to see where this sort of technology takes us moving forward.
Yeah, look, I used to work in the airlines. I remember a pilot saying to me that 99% of the time he was grossly overpaid, but that 1% of the time he earned every penny. And I just worry about that 1% of the time where you get that plane up there, something happens, loses connection, something goes wrong, boom, you don't have a net. You can't turn it off and park. Ryan, are you concerned about this?
I think that, you know, like everything else, right? It's kind of it's innovation, and I mean, you have to trust that we're going to have enough trials to make it safe, to reach the point where it becomes commonplace. I mean, you know, when we talk about self-driving cars, it's the same type of thing, right? Potentially, you know, the idea is that these things are actually going to be, you know, they're going to be fewer accidents. You know, they're going to be a lot safer than, you know, using human controls or whatever.
Absolutely.
So I kind of believe that we're going to reach that point as well. I have to believe that we're going to reach that point as well in air travel.
I just keep on thinking of the scenes from Star Wars from, was it Episode 1, you know, The Phantom Menace, where they're just all zooming around inside of the planet. And I don't know. I'm both scared by it and intrigued by it because, you know, well, it makes it a lot easier for us all to have planes. I don't want to fly a plane. I'd be terrible at it. But if somebody could make it work, I might buy a plane. I wouldn't buy a plane, but there's something there, right? Now, Roger, our producer, was reading these stories and he was like, oh, you know what? This sounds like that movie Stealth, right? You know, where there's this artificial intelligence program and stealth bombers. So, but I was like, no, it's more like Ender's Game, right? Because they're not really self-piloted at this point. The airplanes are actually being piloted by somebody who's just on the ground.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what does this mean for warfare? So if you've got these self-flying planes and drones and robots on the battlefield, Justin, does this mean that warfare is going to be more likely, less likely? Does it matter?
It's tough to say, but at that point, it's almost like, what's the point?
What's the point?
You know,
right.
It's like, who runs out of money first? Who can build the better toys?
Right.
There's no human cost that you think that someone would just sit down and say, well, there's not really a point anymore, so let's just figure this out.
Yeah.
That's the idealist in me, but
I don't know. What do you think? Is war going to be more likely or less likely as we get more self-piloted planes and robots in the battlefield and blowing things up without any human involvement?
Yeah, I mean, we're finding really, really efficient ways to to kill people without like a human cost on our side.
And destroy wealth,
and
right?
destroy wealth. I think the scary thing for me is, you know, applications of this like in sort of an imperialist society where you know, we have all the robots and drones and whatever, and like we can basically sort of decide who's our friend and who's not. I don't know.
Speaking of movies, it just makes me think of WALL-E, right? Remember all those guys, fat and happy on their little spaceship flying around in WALL-E,
yeah.
wherever all the robots took care of them. That's not a world I want to live in. Place that EA doesn't want to live in anymore. Our next story is about Nintendo's Wii U. And EA 2 years ago said, oh, we're going to partnership, we're going to do great stuff, Nintendo, we're on your stage show at E3. Now no games in development for the Wii U. Wow. Nintendo's kind of screwed, right, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, Nintendo, I mean, let's face it, Nintendo hasn't innovated, hasn't caught up with, you know, where the PlayStation or, you know, what the Xbox has done. And I think that they got a little too cutesy in terms of like, you know, they're like, okay, we'll make this fun, but then, you know, they didn't do anything to sort of court developers.
Yeah.
They didn't make, I mean, if you're not playing a Nintendo-made game, you're not really...
Yeah, I agree.
You know,
They're just not, the non-Nintendo games aren't that good, right? I mean, Justin, what do you think about this? Is this it for Nintendo, or there's potential for them, or?
it's definitely scary. I mean, when you look at the catalog that EA has, I mean, Madden is a huge deal.
Right, you're right, exactly. All their franchise titles.
Yeah, and Nintendo...
The Sims.
Exactly. Nintendo's not going to have those games on their platform, so what are they left with? You know, Nintendo fanboys like myself are still going to play the Zeldas and the Smash Brothers and the Metroid, but, you know, guy on the street thinking, what's the best system for Call of Duty or Madden? They're not going to they're not going to go for the Wii.
Well, I mean,
so
they're just. I mean, the platform's just not powerful enough. Is basically what it comes down to. It's just it just hasn't caught up with the pace of innovation on other platforms. And if you're a developer, you don't want to port your game to this crappy little system that isn't going to give users the best experience anyway.
Well, not just the best experience, but users are confused about what the Wii U is.
Right.
People have said, I thought it was an add-on for the Wii.
Right.
So when you have that sort of mindset, it's really difficult for a developer to spend time and resources on a system that people don't really know anything about.
It's too bad because I'm a Zelda fan, big fan. I will play Zelda when it comes out, but I might actually rent a Wii U. I might not buy one.
Where are you going to rent one nowadays?
That's true. I don't know. Nintendo did something else this week that I thought was really interesting that has the potential to change a lot of what happens, particularly on YouTube and other places. They said that they're going out on YouTube now and they're starting to claim Let's Play videos. So you got a fanboy's playing Zelda, playing Twilight Princess, creates a video of it and posts it on YouTube, great. Nintendo's now claiming that and making money on ads that happen before and after it. I thought this was really interesting because companies like Machinima and others made a lot of money on these Let's Play, but who fundamentally owns that IP? I mean, Justin, does Nintendo own it? Does the guy who game own it? It's a gray area, right?
The IP issue is definitely a gray area. I think what's more interesting is about the sort of marketing that this is doing for Nintendo. There was a great article on Wired which said that there's a Let's Play video for Luigi's Mansion that had more views than Wired's feature on the game.
On the game, right.
So it's interesting to see how many people are watching these videos to find out more about the game and then going out and purchasing them. So you've got this person who's making a Let's Play video of this game. They're making a not insignificant amount of money on this video due to ads, right? But now Nintendo is making the money on those ads, so why wouldn't they play a game by Microsoft or Sony?
And in the end, these Let's Play, as you said, tend to promote the games as well and get people interested in playing it, as well as help people through when there are problems, like how do you defeat that boss. Is this a change that you think we're going to see from the other game developers, or is it just going to be Nintendo, Ryan?
I mean, it's tough to say. Like, as Justin said, it's promotional material, so I'm not really sure that Nintendo wants to, cut off that basically free marketing in an effort to make ad money off of it. I mean, if you are one of these gameplay people and you know that Nintendo is going to be claiming your share of creating that, I don't know. Again, maybe you just go to another platform.
Yeah, now the latest Call of Duty has the ability to actually stream what you're doing.
Right.
It's Call of Duty on YouTube and other places as well. But that's promotional. I mean, it gets people to want to play it. So I don't get Nintendo's thing. I mean, it's if I were Machinima, for example, or one of these other companies that did a lot of video game stuff like that, I'd be kind of worried.
Well, Twitch TV, which used to be Justin TV, they do a lot of like live streaming, and they're getting increasingly embedded on these games as a way to sort of stream directly to the internet. So it'd be really interesting to see how this affects them and how it affects sort of this gameplay fanboy ecosystem.
Yeah, see, I mean, take a look at movies, for example. If you take a clip of a movie and post it up with commentary, you're going to get brought down just like that, right? Because you're taking that movie footage and using it for your own purpose. But with games, it's different, and I wonder if they should be. I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see.
I don't know.
Something else happening in the YouTube sphere this week. I thought this was pretty interesting. Microsoft and YouTube going head-to-head. Microsoft developed a YouTube client for their phone, put it out on their phone. Google got pissed and said, hey, you can't do that. Cease desist because you're not running our ads. Microsoft turned back and said, well, we'd run your ads if you just gave us the API. Who's at fault here, Ryan?
Well, I mean, I've talked to some people at YouTube, and basically it comes down to the fact that like YouTube just doesn't think that Windows Phone is a big enough platform, or what they say is they don't think that Windows Phone 8 is a big enough platform. There isn't enough market share there for them to build, update, maintain a whole separate app when they have an HTML5 experience that works just fine. And so, Microsoft's been like kind of nudging them. They wrote a public policy post back in January, I think it was, saying, YouTube is keeping us from having the best experience on our devices. So they just went out and built it themselves. I don't know. I mean, I think that there's probably a lot more happening behind the scenes between Google and Microsoft. And
yeah, I will say, as a company that actually puts a lot of stuff on YouTube and we make money on the ads, I'm not happy with anybody running YouTube videos without the monetization in place, because they're taking money. I mean, it's out of my pocket. Oh, well, out of our pocket. But I think you're right. I don't think the ads really are the issue. I think it's the control of the user experience that's the issue. I mean, think about it. You used to be able to get YouTube like a crappy experience on a DVD player, and then YouTube said control, and we don't want. It's our experience. Who do you think's in the right, Justin?
I mean, it's tough to say. Thinking about the user experience perspective, if you are on a Windows phone and accessing YouTube if it's that kludgy and difficult, are you just not going to watch YouTube video on the phone? Are you not going to watch YouTube video at all? Right. So is it, like you said, not watching with ads is one thing, but would you rather than watch it without ads, or
maybe you'll go to
or not watch it?
I mean,
watch it at all.
Well, I'm not really sure, what the, I'm not really sure what the advantage is of, having a native app, because the HTML5 experience, like just deep linking to the YouTube website, is actually not bad. In the way that they've built it for devices that aren't iOS or Android.
Right, so, but you're bringing up the issue of, I think we're moving to an app world where people are used to on their mobile devices to interact with an app. Right. I got an icon, I got an app, I'm there. HTML5 is great, but until it's packaged up that way, I think there's an issue. Yeah. I don't know. Disagree with me. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just think that the way that Microsoft handled this wasn't great. I mean, to just sort of author this themselves.
I think it was the right thing. I disagree. I think it was the right thing to do because YouTube wouldn't build something for them, and they wanted to have that experience. So what are you going to do? Roll over and play dead? It's not the Microsoft way.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
And isn't YouTube able to stop access from this app if they wanted to?
I'm sure.
That's a good point. They can block it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the other question is just, there are certain content that they don't have the rights to run on mobile devices or tablets or whatever that this app can access, right? And so basically, Microsoft is also sort of, forget about the ads, are also fundamentally like breaking licensing agreements for partners.
So good point.
It does sound like YouTube can fix this if they wanted to.
Right, give them the API, put the ads in. And by the way, if you are watching this right now on your Windows phone, put a comment down there and tell us about how much you love the YouTube experience on your Windows phone, or how much you hate it as well. That's about all the time we have for Downloaded today. Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you very much, Justin, for joining us. A lot of great stuff. If you've got any questions or comments, or if you were at Google I/O and you saw something or have an opinion that we didn't talk about it, put it down in those comments as well, and we'll have a little comment about that as well. And till then, you've been watching Downloaded. Thanks a lot for joining us.